right, now we're back, and we're just going to do our leadership studio, nonprofit leadership studio. Paul, if you're writing a book on leadership, what are some of the chapters for you?
Yeah, I think things that have helped me, and they kind of fit my personality, and that they've proven well for me. And one would be to choose people well, and then really enable them. I owe most of my success in my career to people around me. Some I inherited, some I've been fortunate enough to hire and invest some time and energy in. I'm a big Jim Collins fan, and so I try to monitor myself and other people on the level 5 leadership issue. I don't know if it's the fortune or misfortune, but I've been up close enough to some leaders that have failed on the ego side of things early in my career to realize that's a real threat for certain personalities, I think, especially. And so I think the humble side is easier for people to get, but if you haven't watched someone kind of implode themselves with their arrogance, to understand needing that in check. And you've got to have self-confidence. I mean, any leader has to believe in themselves and take positions on things, and so I think that would be critical. And then just empowering people, to do things that they're capable of doing. And maybe the last one, and this has probably been I think I've gotten better at it only recently. I identified it much earlier in my career, but as being really a lot more direct and honest with people and feedback than I was certainly early in my career, feeling like I was being nice to them if I hid negative things, but at the end of the day, I didn't give them the chance to fix it or get better, and certainly cause problems for other people, because as a lot of times when someone's got an issue or a problem, it's affecting everyone around them, and everyone knows it really is the elephant in the room, and so you might as well name it and try to figure out how to fix it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about getting the right people on the bus and hiring those people. So when you're hiring maybe people that will work immediately for you and other sort of senior level people, what do you look for in those people?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a little bit of a worn-out saying, but I do think character in the person is clearly the first thing. But I don't think you can underestimate the value of raw intelligence and then skill sets for the job. In a past life, at a previous Y, we had a board member that was pretty big on doing really in-depth psychological testing of more senior people. Like, it took you 6 to 8 hours, depending on how long the untimed parts of it took you. And one of the things, with about 50 people being tested and then meeting with the psychologist that did it, we evaluated keys to success. And she's the one that really helped me understand that as you progress and grow the breadth of your responsibility, that there are certain intelligence requirements to succeed. And it took me a long time to accept that. There's a part of me that loves the idea that we're all equal and we're all the same and God made us that way. And so to say, no, there are some differentiating points, and there's a role, and you're important and you bring value, but in a different way. And so I've had to learn that, especially in the position I'm in now, I need people closer to me that have broad responsibilities, that are bright people and skilled in the area they need to be responsible for.
I always think it's amazing, and I think the staff see this sometimes. We've had, for instance, a summer intern, maybe who's super bright, and you see that we had one who was an undergraduate and came in, and we noticed right away he was doing the work of like 5 people, including all of our law students. It was like he just had this capacity, and sometimes those pure smarts can do a lot for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Your background. Talk a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? How did you get here?
So I have a little bit of a unique path. My parents were both from North Carolina. My dad worked for a big insurance company, so we lived in Charlotte, New Orleans, Milwaukee, landed in Chicago. I'm a twin. My brother's a college professor. And my dad's favorite joke was, when the first one's a litter, you don't take any chances, so there's just the 2 of us.
Where does your brother teach college?
Belmont University in Nashville.
In Nashville, yeah.
So we got to Chicago in 5th grade and went through school there in the suburbs of Chicago, and then have a business degree from the University of Illinois, and then a master's in theology. And I was a pastor in Chicago for 12 years. So that's kind of the unique thing about my career for what I'm doing now. But to me, it's not as unique as it is to some other people. So I got to a point in that career where I kind of was looking to do something a little bit different, and had the good fortune of meeting a member of my church who was on the national staff for the Y, and then he ended up down in Florida with the Y and kept trying to recruit me down there, which was pretty easy in January after living in Chicago for 25 years. So I started working for the Y in '96 at a small Y in Sarasota County. Was just there a couple of years. then got to Jacksonville, Florida, was the COO of that Y for 7 years, and then elevated into the CEO seat for about 4, and then was recruited to Houston. The number 2 person here had retired a little early. The CEO was approaching retirement, and the board, to their credit, wanted an external succession person as an option. In our organization, not uncommon at all to hire the CEO from another significant city. You know, you go to the Ys, 10 to 30% smaller, and oftentimes it's kind of a promotion type thing, although each local city's Y is controlled by a board that makes the decision. So I was here for about 3 years in that role, and then elevated to the CEO role a little over 3 years ago.
Wow. What a nice transition, though. It's so unusual in so many jobs, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit, to not have such a smooth transition of you being able to work for the past CEO and so forth.
Yeah, we're seeing more of that, at least in Ys around the country, and I think a couple of things have helped with that. One of them is my situation here, where I actually went out of a CEO role of about a $30 million organization, and when I came here, the Y here was about $100 million. And you know, some of my friends thought, well, why would you take a backward step? And I said, you realize the number 2 job in a $100 million organization is a bit more complex than the number 1 job in a $30 million. And then a real good friend of mine did a similar thing to the Y in the Twin Cities, and then was there a little over 3 years, and he's now the CEO of the Y in Charlotte, North Carolina. So both of us did similar things and went into large organizations, and me by staying put and him by being willing to move again have been successful at doing that. And so it's caught people's attention and taking a look at it.
One of the TED Talks that students have watched is the Dan Pallotta, and he talks about this idea of maybe we're not paying our nonprofit leaders well enough because we're doing the same work as maybe others or more. And there was a controversy before you were in town, but with the previous CEO of YMCA, that some people thought he was being paid too much. But it's a $100 million organization.
Yeah, $130 million now, so it's grown a little in a few years.
How do you explain that to people? Because some people really feel like if we're nonprofit leaders, we probably shouldn't be taking a paycheck. But, I mean, we know better than that. Right?
Exactly. Well, I fortunately, in my situation, if there's an issue, and he, because of some unique circumstances, making a considerable more than I'm making, but you know, there would be people that look at what I make and think it's high, but our board would say, look, we've got a complex organization that needs a leader with a large, varied skill set, and you know, in a sense, the open market sets the price. And if you were to compare, especially as you get over 100 million and beyond most nonprofits, if that were in the business world, virtually everyone would be making even more, and they would have stock options and bonuses and things like that. So I understand people's perspective, but I realize if you want to be highly successful, you've got to have talent, and I'm a big Pallotta fan. I've gotten to meet him once and be in even some small group stuff with him, and just think he's got his finger on the pulse of some things that help make nonprofits better if we follow the principles.
I agree with that too, and I think we should be a field that's competitive and looking for great leaders and looking for people who are going to stay here and really do good things, right? There are plenty of us that we've devoted our life to the nonprofit world, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't be rewarded for doing the right things, right? Tell me a little bit about sort of leadership challenges for you at the Y. I mean, it's a large nonprofit organization. Are these challenges that you have, are they part of just being a large organization, or what are some of the unique challenges that you have as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, my recent, meaning last couple of years, answer to that is really 2 primary ones, and there certainly would be other ones, but one of them is how do we keep growing in a city that's growing? And our organization grew from a physical plant perspective from 2002 to 2010 by significantly adding on to 10 facilities, and we did a large amount of that with debt. We raised some, but when I got here in 2011, we had $200 million worth of debt, which kind of makes a lot of decisions for us. One being we're not borrowing money to build anything new for 4 or 5 more years even now, even though we've paid that down to our next principal payment in 6 months, we'll pay it down to $130 million.
And, that's good.
So we're on a much better payment schedule and getting that down. But the city's growing. There's places in the city that probably we could add. Certainly in some of the suburban areas that there's new population. And then the other one's related to that is how do you get the staff that you need to do that? We're very focused on internal staff development. For 2 reasons. We think by and large the success rate is better when you're moving people up internally. But for a lot of reasons that I know are parallel to businesses and other things, we are not getting people to move. I mean, someone that, if I'd have started out with the why, right out of college, I would have, the typical person that at my age would have made probably 3 to 5 moves. I mean, geographic, maybe even significant geographic moves would have been just the way the progression would have happened. And, you know, we'll post a significant, well-paying executive director job as an example, and if we get a couple of good candidates from other Ys, that's a really good day. So we've just had to realize that option's really not open to us. If the spouse is working, you got the risk of, do I get that job? And it's probably getting a little better, but after 08, 09, if we own a house, oh boy, this is a great new job, but can we sell the house? So there's some real financial factors, and then obviously the tug of moving away from family, if that's an issue, certainly restricts, because we tend to attract people that families are very high value to them, and so the desire to leave family is not always there.
So related to that, when you look at the why here in Houston, you look at the future, what are the things that get you super excited, like whether there be new programs or expansion or new areas? What are the things that really get you jazzed up?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of things that people don't know, and some of those are what get me the most excited. I mean, the obviousness of our 30-plus facilities that have exercise equipment and pools and gyms and things like that, but a couple of the things that we do that are a little bit hidden, we're in 201 elementary schools, so we're the before and after school provider. 4 or 5 ISDs, we're the provider in all of the schools in their system. And so there's been a real shift that you're aware of, at least some of, over the last few years. Even 7, 8 years ago, that was probably truly childcare after school, whereas now there's the expectation of much more of an academic focus, an enrichment focus. We feel like we add the component of all of our snacks are healthy, give them exercise time, formal and informal. And so that's something I'm excited to see us transition that and meet the needs of today's child that maybe they were all along, but we certainly understand that better as a society more today. And then we resettle a number of refugees, been averaging about 800 a year with some of the political changes, and would have dropped a little bit because a lot of them were from Cuba in recent years. So even that policy shift has slowed that down, and just so many opportunities if the politics will shift back at some point. So much talent comes into our country, and you know, my understanding is grows regularly on refugees, but they've been so well vetted and they bring such talent, and the reason they've had to flee is their leaders and their talented people. That's why they pose a threat to somebody in their homeland, and they've had to flee that. And just to see, you know, just one real brief story, a young lady that got to us about 1.5 years ago, literally fled in the middle of the night in her early 20s with her brother and her mom. Her mom was a physician, and the ISIS troops were trying to get her to treat their people, and to get away from that, the risk she thought was involved, they left and, you know, ended up in refugee camps for 18 to 24 months. And she lands here, and in 6 months' time, we're talking about a woman that's a certified pharmacist, and she gets hired as a delivery person for Domino's Pizza, and in 3 months becomes the assistant store manager. She's figured out the 5 things she needs to do to get her license here, and is on her way. And then another one, a gentleman that actually lost a leg rescuing a U.S. troop off the battlefield in Afghanistan. And so he's in a wheelchair, but he's here, and in just over 2 years, he's got 2 kids. He's supporting them by working at CVS 30 hours a week. He, last May, finished his associate's degree at HCC and is at U of H now getting a degree in accounting. And you just realize, you know, what I tell people is, imagine this, pick any country where you don't know the language. You've got, you know, an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, make them older. It'd be even worse if they were younger. I mean, just think about that for a minute. And you get there with a suitcase, and that's basically what you got. And they build such amazing lives for themselves and contribute so much to our country.
Why we're afraid of, you know, smart people from other countries is sort of is beyond me, right? Let me, let's go to the Twitterverse here to see what people have, and let's see here. Okay, we have a lot of tweets. So here we go. Stacy McKenzie wants to know, you spoke about being more direct in your approach, learning to be more direct. Do you encourage that characteristic within your staff, to be honest and direct? Yeah, so I'm using a CEO coach that I've had for coming up on the 3-year anniversary of that's from the corporate world, but been a Y volunteer most of his life on 2 different major city Y boards, and so understands our world pretty well. Took a 3-year break out to be the CEO of
a company in New York City working with Michael Bloomberg that trained their principals,
Yeah.
and so understands that dynamic of it. And he's gotten us into using kind of a modified 9-block tool of evaluating people. And we're now meeting every 6 months, and we started out with just about the top 20 or 30 people in the organization, and then with 2 more steps down, we're having those kind of evaluations and conversations with about 150 people in our organization. And so strengths, weaknesses, looking at really 2 dynamics, one on the performance side and the skill side, but then the other one on the character attitude side. And a little surprising when we dug into it, we've got as many people historically probably that struggle in different ways on that attitude side as on the skill set side.
Interesting,
and so,
right.
Some of them surprisingly not aware of real blind spots on some things, and sometimes those are the easiest ones to fix, because sometimes it's really not a character flaw, it's a lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And so when you make that known, but yeah, I mean, it's taken us a while to get better at it, because it requires having a painful conversation, and sometimes people are surprised by what you tell them because we haven't done that previously.
Yeah.
But sometimes the most common one is my husband or wife has told me that. So then you've really kind of hit the nerve. It's like, okay, now we got a 2-for-1 on you here. I'll lighten up.
Is that a proprietary system, the one that
No.
you're using? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
So we're just getting better at it. There's a little bit of subjective, but I tell people all the time, there's no evaluation system that's totally objective.
Right.
Because even when you set the objectives, there's a subjective nature to that. So you're just open and honest about that. And I think as long as you're doing it with a caring, we want you to succeed and get better approach. It's not meant to be punitive. It's totally separated from any compensation adjustments. And so it really is
that's
about
good.
growing and developing as a person and as an employee and worker, separate from performance on a level that would affect compensation.
What do you think? I know there's a lot of controversy or a lot of disagreement around 360 evaluations. What are your thoughts on 360?
We've done those. I did, that was the first thing the CEO coach did with me after he'd been working, because he really works with our whole team. And, it's painful sometimes to hear some things. I didn't consider mine overly painful, but it wasn't all roses and sunshine by any mark. And so we've only gone down, all of my direct reports have now done it, and I did it. And I would probably be slightly hesitant to go much deeper. There's a level of maturity and self-confidence that I think's needed to hear that much truth.
Yeah.
But for us, it was good. Our board was interviewed in regards to me, and so they felt like they had, some ownership and involvement in it. And then I guess, you need to. Our other little bit challenges is you get too far down, it would be a limited number of people that would be giving input.
Yeah.
And so it would be kind of easy to identify who did it, and that's not the purpose, but human nature is always going to want to figure out who said that, and that can be a difficult situation.
Luis Morales wants to know, how do you ensure that you have a diverse workforce at the Y?
Yeah, so we've done a lot with that. We actually brought in an outside consultant that did 3 or 4 major days sessions. We've got a staff group that's focused on that. And so for us, we don't have much problem at all outside of the full-time exempt. It just is kind of naturally taking care of itself, and we're large enough we have to file EEOC reports. And so we're looking at that on an annual basis and have really good diversity beyond that. The more senior you get, the less diverse we get, and so for us, that's all about sourcing candidates. And so 3 of our probably 6 or 7 higher level hires in the last 2 years, we've gone out in really all 3 cases and recruited people in that brought diversity. To just post a job in our world would mean on our local website, and our national organization does have a pretty well viewed site for doing that, but as we say, to post and pray is not a real good way to get good talent or to get diversity. So I think it's active engagement, and we've got some special development plans internally to try to fast track people that will help us be diverse that are already on our team.
Yeah. Do you like to go out and sort of figure out who are the best in town at doing these things and try to hire them? Do you ever do anything like that?
Yeah, we've hired some in town. I'm always a little bit leery of hiring in town. We try to hire a little more for otherwise, but those 3 I'm talking about, one we actually hired from our national organization, so I had to have a heart-to-heart with a couple of key people, including our national CEO, before we made that move. And then we have hired 2 other people from one a high-level education group and then another nonprofit in town. And The one, someone else knew the person to talk to. The other one, I called the CEO of the organization once I realized it was serious and said, I want you to hear this from me, not anybody else, and here's the situation. So I do think it's appropriate to be respectful of other people, and this person probably would have, when I'm talking to other Y people, when it gets to a point that they're really serious and then we think they're a legitimate candidate, my message is, you either need to go tell the appropriate people in your organization or I'm going to pick up the phone and make the call. And I think I had one person once say, I'd feel better if you did it, but most want to be the ones to do that. But I don't ever think you lose anything by being open and upfront with people. And I hope most people are like me. I tell my people all the time, I don't want you to go, but if for family reasons or career reasons, going somewhere else is right, I'll do anything I can to help you, because ultimately, I think I'm going to have the best organization and the best team if people know that, when you go to work for that organization, they look out for you, even if that means you leaving them.
Yeah,
so.
Very good. Leslie Azalia wants to know, how many years of experience do you think it's necessary to have to be in a leadership position? Interesting question.
That is kind of interesting. I've got 2 adult daughters that are in the 25 to 29 age range, and one of my pet peeves in recent years with some of their friends is it seems like half of them want to start a nonprofit, and I'm like, the last thing the world needs is another small nonprofit. So
that's a discussion in the class, by the way.
I always encourage them, go find a big nonprofit whose mission aligns with you, even if you only plan to be there 2 to 3 years. One, you'll learn a lot more about yourself and the organization. And through one of my daughters, my oldest daughter actually worked for Target for a good while, and oddly enough, they were a great learning for me about how to lead the Y better, because their store parallels one of our centers. We have an executive director is our title. They have a store manager. We call ours program directors. They call theirs department heads. They have manager on duty shifts. They're open the kind of hours we're open. They deal with a lot of part-time hourly staff, and so I learned a lot through them, and they will move people faster than most nonprofits ever would. So I'm pretty regularly saying to my staff now, they'll comment, well, we think he could do it or she could do it, but they maybe not have quite enough experience. I said, if they're the talent, let's take a chance on them. I would rather build up their shortcomings than hiring someone that's maybe 10 years more experienced, but we know not as talented, and then we're helping build up their shortcomings. We all have them, so we cover our shortcomings by who we put around us, and if we know what they are, it's easier to cover them.
Excellent. Ruth Gitumbi wants to know, she said, we've read about accepting brutal truths as leaders. What brutal truth have you had to accept and face while at the YMCA?
Yeah, so to get real specific on giving the honest feedback, I would almost get to the point of lying by omission at what I would not say to people. And to realize that I was doing that, I convinced myself I was doing that more for their feelings. Truth is, I was doing it at least as much for my own, and not wanting the guilt, conflict or the guilt. Oh my gosh, I'm telling them, and who am I to be telling this person they're not good at this when they could hold up a mirror and point out 3 things I'm not good at. So I think certainly that's one. One that's obvious to me that my wife helps me a lot with is, by nature, I'm more introverted, and there's certain aspects of my job that require a lot of extroversion, and it doesn't affect me speaking and all of that. I've done so much of that in my life, that comes pretty easily to me, but I'm going to an event later tonight, and there'll be 30 or 40 people, and it'll be a social gathering, and I'll be exhausted when I'm done. We joke that if we go to a pure fun event, she'll know everyone that's there by the time we leave. I'll know the life history of 2 people. It's just, the small talk thing is something I'm not good at, and I've had people point that out to me, because it gets perceived at times as rudeness or aloofness, and I don't mean that, but it's just a part of my... So what I've learned is I'm not going to change the fact that that's a part of who I am. So I need to figure out ways to manage that, whether it's having my wife at even some work-related social events with me, or other staff that are stronger in that area and can carry me a little bit.
Wow. It's interesting, this whole idea of brutal truths, though. It's, no matter how much you do the direct with staff, it doesn't mean that it's not
never
necessarily...
gets easier.
No,
and I don't think it
right?
should, actually, because you're telling something to someone that's an area of limitation or weakness, and if that gets to where that's old hat and easy for you, then there's probably too many calluses. It's time to move on to something else.
Mara Hartzell wants to know, does your background as a seminary student, former seminary students, and minister, does that influence your leadership?
Oh, I think so. I think, someone liked to say to me, and I hope it's true, it's probably a little bit of an overstatement, but used to describe me as having a heart for the mission of our work and a mind for the business. And I do find it helps me realize that the overwhelming majority of people, especially our more frontline people in our organization, are in it really for the mission. They don't care that we're a business, but as you know, when you get to be $130 million, if somebody's not minding the business, all kinds of problems. And my board cares way more about that than they care about the mission, but they know that as we grow and develop the business part of what we do, that way more mission is going to get done. And so I think that, and I think, I tell people really the one thing I think I've gotten down to some degree is helping to develop people. And I did that with more of a spiritual focus in a church, a lot of teaching in smaller groups and in larger settings. And that's really how I've approached my job at the Y, is that it's always about getting people and developing them and helping them get better. And if you do that, then the organization will be better.
Are you a guest minister every once in a while?
Not so much here in Houston, but the two places we lived before for fairly significant amounts of time, I did a lot more of that. They were not huge churches, so I was the vacation speaker, and have until recently always been on elder leadership boards and played key roles as a volunteer.
I'm asked to do that quite often, to be the guest minister, but I end up talking about children and poverty. And my criticism is that people say I don't put enough scriptures in. So maybe I'm not as invited back as often as I could be. So.
Yeah, well, I think, to me, I tell people the thing I got asked a lot, and it's people from a certain religious background that frame it this way, and I'm not at all being critical of it, it's just their perspective. Why did you leave the ministry? And my pat answer was, and it was especially true earlier in my career where I was actually running a center and way more directly involved in what was happening on the front lines, is I do way more direct help of people than I ever did as a pastor. Both the churches were reasonably small, by today's standards for sure. And I was in a lot of meetings and did a lot of administrative work. And, if I actually boiled down the direct contact helping people, it was somewhat limited even when I had the pastor title.
Jack Morgan wants to know, what characteristics do you feel qualify, what do you look for a great board member?
Yeah, so we've worked a lot in our board on becoming more diverse in every way. Interestingly, our single biggest weakness right now is still gender. We're approving at a meeting next week next year's class of 7 board members, and that will help move us close to where we need to be on gender. We've gotten there over the last 3 or 4 years on racial diversity. So, but for us, it's about jobs, it's about backgrounds and experiences, so it's not just some of the demographic categories. Board members are really engaged. That's one thing we've actually begun to shrink. I inherited a philosophy of a really, really large board. There were 57 on the board, and we're down to 39, and we may even get smaller than that. We've developed a really active executive committee with our committee chairs, and those meetings are dramatically different. And so our structure is the board meets every other month, executive committee every other, and we're bringing ideas early in their formation from senior staff to that executive committee and getting a lot of good dialogue and feedback on that. So being engaged, we'll rotate people. Our system is a 3-year term. You can do 3 more, then you have to sit out a year, and it's not uncommon to come back again. But we've rotated some people off after 3 if they didn't get engaged with us. And then kind of a given as you get larger is they've got to understand the role of the board. The board's role is not to run the organization. It's to set policy and guide the leader in certain ways, and it's up to staff to run the organization.
And hopefully you have board members. Every once in a while there's a board member who wants to run an organization, right? But it's great when you have another board member who says, that's not our role.
Yeah, and I've had a couple, we haven't had a big problem with that, but a couple times it tends to be, in my experience, people that don't overstep on the whole organization, but there's some little area that's kind of a pet area for them, and they'll try to really insert themselves. And I've had board members, it's a way better conversation board member to board member than staff to board member.
I always am so appreciative of those board members that step up. So this is a good question. As a Y member, I encounter wonderful staff. Is there a directed effort in ensuring this? Because it's true, you walk into a Y, everyone seems to be super friendly. Is there a whole training program for that?
Yeah, I would think that we have probably one of the most robust training programs of at least Ys that I'm familiar with. I'm actually encouraged to hear that. One of our, if I'd have listed 3 or 4 concerns, one of them is just within our operating structure financially, how do we find ways to keep increasing pay? Because as the economy has gotten stronger, we've done about a 10 or 12% on most of our part-time pay, and it's still probably not high enough, especially in our child care arena, to attract overall the talent level we would want. So we're working pretty aggressively to try to do that. We employ about 4,000 staff this time of year. That balloons to a little over 5,000 in the summer. We have 15, 16 pools that are seasonal. Our day camps require staffing all day versus now we're 3 to 4 hours after school and maybe an hour or so before school. And of that, use today's 4,000 number, just under 500 of them are full-time. So that's one thing unique to us is a significant number of part-time. A lot of them are 25 to 30 hours. That's just the natural way the after-school works, but a lot of them are 1, 2, 3 hour Group X instructors. So we have a very diverse type of staff. So it takes a lot of concerted effort, I think, to hire them. And we hire actually a lot of members. If you go back, especially the ones that work in the center, they get to know the why, and especially if they only want part-time, and that's always, I think, a good option for us.
Wow. So in our last couple minutes, your favorite restaurant in Houston, Paul?
Yeah, boy, there's so many good restaurants in Houston. So if my wife and I had to pick one place to go tonight, we'd probably go to Benji's on Washington.
Oh, that's a great place, right? That's a really good place. And is there a Y in town or someplace near a Y that you think is sort of special that maybe a lot of people don't know that they should check out? Something special. I mean, I think about the Y downtown. If people have never seen it, it's
it's
great.
Really unique. It's modern. It's a 5-story building. There's a lot of cool stuff there. It'd be a little bit of a drive, but I think one of our more unique things is we have a 500-acre resident camp up on Lake Livingston outside of Trinity, and because of allowing it to deteriorate over a number of years, and then after they'd done a master plan to rebuild it, the best thing that ever happened was that the dining hall burned down in the middle of the night in 2010, which caused us to completely relocate the heart of camp almost a half a mile close to the water. And so we've got all kinds of water sports. We own 50 horses up there. It's gorgeous, pine trees everywhere. It's hot in the summer, but it's this time of year. We have a lot of family camps. We just started those 4 or 5 years ago when we reopened, and now we could do them 52 weekends a year and sell them out if we wanted to.
Yeah. And then the final big question, if we're making the Paul McEntire movie, who do you want to play you?
Boy, I don't know. I would say George Clooney, but my wife would laugh out loud at me. So,
and I'm not laughing at you.
Maybe in another day, I don't know, a young Gene Hackman or somebody.
Hopefully,
there you go,
right?
Someone that
Gene
would have
Hackman.
a little character to them, I would hope.
Yeah,
so
very good. Paul, thank you for all the work that you do with the Y. Thanks for coming and being part of the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Nice to see you, man.
Great. Thank you.
Very good. Hey, that's our abbreviated version of the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Keep up the great work. We'll see you next time.